Two creeps in a gas station. It was the middle of a sweltering summer day, the kind where the heat shimmers on the asphalt and the air feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you. My husband, our 2-year-old daughter, and I were on a road trip to visit family, a journey we'd made countless times before. About 20 minutes outside of our town was a large gas station, a familiar pit stop for us. It wasn't massive, but it was bigger than most in the area, with a wide variety of snacks, drinks, and oddities that made it a popular rest stop for travelers. We always stopped there, gas, snacks, and a chance to stretch our legs. It was routine, safe, until that day. We pulled into the gas station, the tires crunching over the gravel as my husband maneuvered the car to an open pump. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows across the parking lot. We'd all used the bathroom before leaving the house, so I left our daughter strapped into her car seat while my husband filled the tank. I grabbed our reusable water bottles and headed inside to refill them and pick up some snacks for the road. The gas station was bustling, the hum of chatter and the occasional ding of the doorbell signaling new customers. The interior was brightly lit, but the fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting an uneven glow over the aisles. The bathrooms and water fountain were down a narrow hallway at the back of the store, a secluded area that always felt a little too quiet compared to the rest of the building. I decided to grab the snacks first, then fill the water bottles on my way out. The line at the register was already long, and I didn't want to risk it getting worse. As I stood in line, clutching our snacks and water bottles, I noticed two men step in behind me. They were tall, taller than me, and I'm 5'10". Both wore identical outfits, khaki shorts and plain gray t-shirts, the kind of nondescript clothing that made them blend in a little too well. Their faces were unremarkable, but there was something about their presence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. They were whispering to each other in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded Middle Eastern, but I couldn't be sure. What struck me most was their stillness. They didn't fidget or glance around like most people in line. They just stood there, their eyes fixed on me. I shifted slightly, turning so they were in my peripheral vision. I pretended to look at a display of kids' toys, unicorns, rainbows, and glittery trinkets, but I could feel their eyes on me. One of them was staring directly at me, his expression blank but unnerving, like he was studying me, memorizing my every move. I forced a polite smile and a half nod, hoping to diffuse whatever tension I was imagining. But when I looked away, I could still feel his gaze burning into me. Their whispering continued, low and rhythmic, like a chant. Even though the store was noisy, their voices cut through the din, sending a chill down my spine. I told myself I was overreacting. They were just two guys in line, probably discussing something mundane. But my gut told me otherwise. Every time I shifted my weight or adjusted the items in my arms, they moved too, positioning themselves directly behind me. It was subtle at first, but then it became deliberate, every single time. I glanced at my phone. 4 minutes had passed, and the line hadn't moved much. The cashier was dealing with a customer who had some issue with a membership card, and the delay was agonizing. The two men kept up their strange behavior, pretending to look at the unicorn toys, but always circling back to stand behind me. They went back to the same toy 4 times, their movements stiff and unnatural, like they were following a script. Each time I turned to check, their eyes were on me, unblinking and intense. My heart started to race. I felt trapped, like the walls of the gas station were closing in around me. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. I considered abandoning the snacks and bolting for the door, but I didn't want to cause a scene. Not with my daughter waiting in the car. Not with my husband just outside, unaware of what was happening. Then, a small miracle. A middle-aged woman and her teenage daughter joined the line behind the men. The woman caught my eye, and I must have looked as panicked as I felt because she immediately understood. She whispered something to her daughter, who nodded and slipped away to check if the self-checkout was open. The woman kept her eyes on me, her expression calm but alert. She was my lifeline, though I didn't know it yet. The men were getting bolder. They were so close now that I could feel their breath on the back of my neck, hot and unsettling. They brushed against me as they pretended to examine the candy displays, their movements too deliberate to be accidental. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, and tried to steady my breathing. I was seconds away from dropping everything and running when the teenager returned. The woman stepped forward, her hand gently gripping my arm. "Come with me," she said softly, her voice firm but kind. She led me to the self-checkout, her presence a shield between me and the two men. We worked quickly, scanning our items and keeping an eye on the men, who were now glaring at us from across the store. Their earlier blank expressions had twisted into something darker, angrier. They took a step toward us, but the woman was faster. She grabbed my bag and receipt, her movements smooth and confident, and ushered me out the door. The sunlight outside was blinding after the dim interior of the gas station. I blinked, disoriented, and then I saw my car. My husband was inside, our daughter in her car seat, blissfully unaware of the nightmare I'd just escaped. The woman handed me my bag and gave me a reassuring smile. "You're safe now," she said. I hugged her, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, and thanked her over and over. She just nodded, like it was nothing, and walked away with her daughter. I climbed into the car, my hands shaking as I buckled my seatbelt. My husband took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I told him everything, my voice trembling as I recounted the men's behavior, their stares, their deliberate movements. He listened, his jaw tightening with each detail. "We're not stopping here again," he said finally, his voice low and serious. I nodded, grateful for his protectiveness, but still shaken to my core. We filled our water bottles at the next gas station, a smaller, quieter place that felt safer in comparison. 6 months later, we moved out of the area, leaving behind the memory of that day. But I've never forgotten the woman who stepped in when I needed her most. If she ever reads this, I want her to know, you're my hero. You saw me, you understood, and you acted without hesitation. Thank you. As for the two men, I don't know what they wanted or what they were planning. Maybe they were just trying to intimidate me. Maybe it was something worse, I'll never know. But what I do know is this, trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. And sometimes angels come in the form of strangers in a gas station, ready to step in when you need them most. Don't go to the gas station at night. The clock on my dashboard blinked 11:07 p.m. as I pulled into the dimly lit gas station. I cursed myself for waiting so late to fill up, but the day had been a whirlwind of work and errands, and I hadn't made time earlier. The station was one of those old, weathered places, flickering fluorescent lights, cracked pavement, and a sign that buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow over the lot. The kind of place that feels like it's been forgotten by time. As I rolled up to the pumps, I noticed a couple of cars scattered around. A beat-up sedan, a minivan, and a large, rusted truck parked 2 pumps over. The presence of other people gave me a fleeting sense of relief. At least I'm not alone out here, I thought. I grabbed my cash and headed inside to pay. The clerk behind the counter barely glanced up, his face illuminated by the pale blue light of a small TV playing static. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale coffee and burnt plastic. I handed him the money, and he grunted something unintelligible before sliding my receipt across the counter. When I stepped back outside, the lot felt different. The sedan and minivan were gone, leaving only the rusted truck and my car. The fluorescent lights above the pumps buzzed louder now, flickering intermittently, casting long, jagged shadows across the pavement. I shook off the unease and walked to my car, inserting the pump into the tank. As I waited for the gas to fill, I leaned against my car and pulled out my phone, trying to distract myself from the growing sense of isolation. The night was unnaturally quiet, no distant hum of traffic, no chirping crickets, just the mechanical click of the pump and the faint rustle of wind. Then I saw him. Out of the corner of my eye, a figure emerged from the shadows near the rusted truck. He was tall, wearing a tattered jacket and jeans that hung loosely on his frame. His movements were slow, deliberate, as he circled the front of my car. My heart skipped a beat when our eyes met. His gaze was piercing, almost predatory, and a chill ran down my spine. "Hey," he called out, his voice low and gravelly. "You got any change for gas?" I shook my head quickly, forcing a polite smile. "No, sorry." He tilted his head, studying me with an unsettling intensity. "That's cool. "Hey, you want me to remove the pump for you?" "No, I'm good, thanks," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. The pump clicked, signaling it was done. He knew it too. His eyes flicked to the pump, then back to me. He didn't move, just stood there, fidgeting with something in his pocket. My stomach churned as I realized how exposed I was. The lot was empty now, and the clerk inside was nowhere to be seen. I tried to keep my breathing steady, my eyes darting around for any sign of another car pulling in. But the lot remained deserted. The man began pacing behind my car, just out of sight. I could hear his footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling like a vulture. My mind raced. Do I make a run for it? Do I scream? But I was frozen, my hand gripping the pump nozzle like a lifeline. The cold night air bit at my skin, and I realized I hadn't even started my car. The pump was still in the tank, and I was a sitting duck. Finally, I saw him move toward his truck. He didn't get in, just walked around it, his back to me. This was my chance. I yanked the pump out, my hands shaking as I fumbled to replace the gas cap. He noticed. In an instant, he was striding toward me, his movements unnervingly fast. "Oh, hey," he said, his voice dripping with false cheer. "You're really beautiful, you know that?" I forced a nod, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see his eyes now, wide, bloodshot, with a manic glint that made my skin crawl. "I don't look like a serial killer, do I?" he asked, his lips curling into a grotesque smile. The question hung in the air like a threat. My breath caught in my throat. Yes, I wanted to scream. "You look exactly like one." But I didn't say a word. I slammed the gas cap shut, yanked open my car door, and threw myself inside. My hands fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life as I slammed it into gear. He was still standing there watching me as I peeled out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, I saw him raise a hand, waving slowly, that same twisted smile plastered across his face. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, my hands still trembling on the wheel. The encounter replayed in my mind on a loop. The way he'd circled my car, the look in his eyes, the way he'd asked that horrifying question. It wasn't until I got home that I noticed something else. A small, crumpled piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. My stomach dropped as I unfolded it. Scrawled in messy handwriting were the words, "See you next time." I never went back to that gas station, and I never will. So ladies, gentlemen too, take this as a warning. Avoid gas stations at night if you can. Carry something to protect yourself, and trust your instincts. Because you never know who or what might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That night, I learned the hard way that some places and some people are best avoided after dark, and some encounters leave scars that never fully heal. The eerie pizza delivery encounter. I had an encounter tonight that's definitely going to stick with me for a while. It wasn't just creepy, it was the kind of unsettling that chills you to the bone, even though it's not anything I can easily explain away. I've been a pizza delivery guy for about 2 years now, and while you meet all sorts of characters in this line of work, tonight was different. I arrived at this nondescript house in a part of town where the streetlights seemed to dim just a touch too early. The house had an air of neglect, with overgrown shrubs that whispered as I walked by, like they were sharing secrets about the place. When I called to confirm the order, the man's voice was gravely, like every word was being dragged through decades of cigarettes and sorrow. He didn't come to the door immediately, which isn't uncommon, but this time, the silence felt heavy, almost expectant. The front door was ajar, revealing only a screen door, which was just a thin veil between me and the shadowy interior. Peering in, I could see the living room, lit by a single lamp that cast long, eerie shadows across the room. My eyes were drawn to the oddities above the kitchen doorway. There were 2 unframed photos, both identical, of a young boy, his image grainy and monochrome, looking like it was lifted straight from a 1970s missing child poster. The eyes in the photo seemed to follow me, not with a warm gaze, but with a haunting emptiness. These weren't just pictures, they screamed of a loss too profound to be casually displayed. Between these photos was something even more bizarre, a bundle of sticks, not neatly tied but haphazardly gathered as if plucked from some dark ritual. They were dried out, brittle, the kind that might snap if you touched them, whispering tales of witchcraft or worse. On the other side of this bundle, an old yellowed newspaper clipping was taped up. It showed a woman with a dated hairstyle, her expression unreadable due to the damage of time. But there was something in her eyes, a sadness or perhaps fear captured for eternity. Just as I was soaking in the oddity of it all, the man appeared. He moved with a slow, deliberate pace, like he was walking through a nightmare. His eyes, when they met mine, were dark pools, devoid of much life but full of stories no one would want to hear. He paid for the pizza, his hands shaking, and gave me a tip that felt more like a payment for silence than service. As I left, the chill of the night seemed to seep into my bones, not just from the cold but from the lingering dread of what I'd seen. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a memorial, a personal project to solve an old case, or just an eccentric collection. But the gut feeling was clear. This was not normal. Driving away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had glimpsed into someone's very private, very dark world. The street seemed to close behind me, as if to keep its secrets contained. I've seen odd things before, but nothing quite like this. Maybe I'm overthinking it, or maybe I've just stumbled upon one of those mysteries that are better left unsolved. I'm back home now, but those images, the boy's eyes, the woman's haunted look, they're with me, making me question what really goes on behind closed doors in the quiet parts of town. If anyone has experienced anything similar or has insights into what this could mean, I'm all ears. Because right now, I feel like I've only seen the tip of a very dark iceberg. The last sunset. 4 years ago, I was forced to leave the city that had been my home for over 7 years. It wasn't just any city, it was a sprawling, chaotic, beautiful East Coast metropolis that had shaped me in ways I couldn't fully articulate. But the real anchor was my girlfriend, Clara. We had been together for 3 years, living in a cozy apartment we painstakingly made our own. The thought of leaving her behind, even temporarily, was like tearing a piece of myself away. On my last day, Clara and I decided to visit my favorite sunset spot, a quiet park overlooking the river, where the skyline melted into the horizon. It was a place we'd spent countless evenings, talking, laughing, and dreaming. That night, the sky was a fiery canvas of oranges and purples, as if the city itself was bidding me farewell. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, a strange unease settled over me, like the calm before a storm. We decided to call an Uber to head back to our apartment for one final night together. I opened the app, my fingers fumbling slightly, and accidentally set the pickup location a few blocks away. The driver was already close, so Clara and I started running, hand in hand, laughing as we weaved through the dimly lit streets. That's when I noticed her. A woman, short and neatly dressed, was running behind us. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe she was late for her own ride. I joked to Clara, think she ordered the same Uber? But as we passed one intersection, then another, the woman stayed close, her footsteps echoing ours. My laughter died in my throat. At the next intersection, I stopped abruptly, pulling Clara to a halt. The woman took a few steps ahead before realizing we weren't following. She turned to face us, her eyes wide and pleading. Her face was pale, almost ghostly under the flickering streetlight. She clutched a T-Mobile bag in one hand, her other hand buried deep in her purse. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Her response came in a rush, her words tumbling over each other. "Please, let me get in the cab with you. My life is in danger. They're after me. Please, I just need to get away." Her voice was trembling, but there was something else, a strange intensity, like she was trying to convince herself as much as us. Her eyes darted around, scanning the shadows as if expecting someone or something to emerge. I tightened my grip on Clara's hand. "I'm sorry, but no, I can't let you in the cab. I'll walk you to a safe place or call the police, but you're not coming with us." The woman's face twisted in desperation. "You don't understand. They're everywhere. They'll find me if I stay here. Please, just let me come with you." Her hand in her purse made me nervous. Was she holding something? A weapon? A phone? I couldn't tell, but I wasn't willing to risk it. Not with Clara by my side. Not on my last night in the city. I canceled the Uber right in front of her, hoping it would make my refusal clear. "I'll order you a cab," I said firmly. "Where do you need to go?" She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. I asked for her number so I could check on her later. She reached into her T-Mobile bag and pulled out a brand new iPhone box. A post-it note was stuck to it, with a number scrawled in messy handwriting. She read it aloud, her hand trembling, before slipping it back into her purse. It was the only time her hand left the bag, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. I ordered her an Uber to a random suburban street near the woods, a location that felt oddly specific and unsettling. As the car pulled up, she turned to me one last time, her eyes filled with a strange mix of gratitude and fear. "Thank you," she whispered, before sliding into the back seat. I watched the car disappear into the night, a knot of unease tightening in my chest. Clara and I walked home in silence, the weight of the encounter hanging between us. Later that night, I got a notification that the woman had reached her destination. I sent her a text, "Are you okay?" No response. Hours passed, then days. The message remained unanswered, and the woman's face haunted my thoughts. Who was she? What was she running from? And why did she choose us? The questions gnawed at me, but the answers never came. Claire and I moved on, but the memory of that night lingered like a shadow. Sometimes when I walk through the city at dusk, I catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see her again, running, pleading, her hand buried deep in her purse. Was it a scam? A desperate cry for help? Or something darker? Something I couldn't or didn't want to understand? I'll never know. But one thing is certain. That night, as the sun set on my time in the city, something sinister brushed against the edges of my life. And I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly avoided a fate far worse than I could imagine. The van in the dark. When I was 19, I had an encounter that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. It was a cool autumn evening, the kind where the air feels heavy and the shadows seem to stretch longer than usual. I had just finished closing up the store where I worked, a small retail shop in a quiet part of town. My coworker and I locked up together, and they drove off, leaving me to walk home alone. I wasn't worried at first. My apartment was just across the street, a mere 2-minute walk. The building I lived in was an old brick structure with an auto shop on the ground floor, owned by my uncle. The shop was usually closed by that time of night, but occasionally my uncle would stay late to finish up work. That detail would end up being more important than I could have imagined. It was around 9:30 p.m., and the streets were eerily empty. The glow of the streetlights cast long, wavering shadows on the pavement, and the only sound was the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. I had a couple of bags slung over my shoulder, filled with things I'd bought from work earlier that day. I was lost in thought, replaying the events of my shift in my head, when suddenly the low rumble of an engine broke the silence. A dark blue minivan pulled up beside me, its tires crunching against the gravel on the side of the road. The vehicle seemed to materialize out of nowhere, and the suddenness of it made my heart skip a beat. I glanced at the driver, a man with a gaunt face and hollow eyes that seemed to glint in the dim light. He rolled down the passenger side window and leaned toward me, his voice unnervingly calm. "Hey, you need a ride?" he asked, his tone almost too casual. I forced a polite smile and shook my head. "No, thank you, I live just up the street." I quickened my pace, clutching my bags tighter, but the van kept pace with me, crawling along the curb. The man's voice grew more insistent. "Are you sure? It's no trouble. I don't mind." "I'm sure," I said firmly, my voice wavering slightly. I kept walking, my eyes fixed straight ahead, but I could feel his gaze burning into me. Then his tone shifted. It was no longer friendly or casual, it was demanding, almost frantic. "Come on, get in the car! Come on! Get in the car! Get in the car! Come on, get in!" His voice rose with each word, echoing in the empty street. My pulse raced, and I could feel the weight of his desperation pressing down on me. I wanted to run, but I was terrified of leading him straight to my apartment. Instead, I decided to loop around the block, hoping to lose him. As I turned the corner, I noticed a faint glow coming from the auto shop. The garage door was open, and the fluorescent lights inside spilled out onto the sidewalk. Relief washed over me. My uncle must have been working late. I hurried toward the shop, my footsteps quick and uneven. The van's engine revved behind me, and for a moment I thought he might follow me into the garage. But as soon as the van's headlights hit the open garage door, the vehicle screeched to a halt. I glanced over my shoulder just in time to see the van swerve sharply and speed off into the night, its taillights disappearing into the darkness. I stumbled into the shop, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My uncle looked up from the engine he was working on, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he took in my panicked state. "What's wrong?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. I told him everything, my voice trembling as I recounted the encounter. He listened intently, his jaw tightening as I described the man's persistence and the way he'd sped off when he saw the open garage. "Stay here for a bit," my uncle said, his tone firm. "I'll keep an eye out." I waited in the shop for what felt like an eternity, my nerves still on edge. When I finally felt safe enough to leave, my uncle walked me to the door and watched as I crossed the street to my apartment. I locked the door behind me, double-checked the windows, and sat in the living room with all the lights on until my dad came home. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the van had been watching me for longer than I realized. The way he'd appeared out of nowhere, the way he'd known exactly how to unsettle me, it felt calculated, almost predatory. In the days that followed, I bought pepper spray and made a vow to never walk alone at night without some form of protection. I usually carried a weighted pocket knife, but I'd left it at home that day after using it for a craft project. The irony wasn't lost on me. The one time I didn't have it, I'd needed it most. I never saw the van again, but the memory of that night stayed with me. It was a stark reminder that danger can lurk in the most mundane moments, even in a place you think is safe. To anyone reading this, please don't take your safety for granted. Even a 2-minute walk can turn into a nightmare if you let your guard down. Always be aware of your surroundings, trust your instincts, and don't hesitate to ask for help if you feel unsafe. Because sometimes, the shadows aren't just shadows, and the strangers in the dark aren't as harmless as they seem.